Don't you just love junipers? I know I do, and that's why I always propagate them. And last year I made a video and I showed you how you propagate junipers. From selecting the cutting, pruning it to size, planting it up, letting it sit, and then I had these pots and I put them in the shade. Not everything went well, I had some problems. All along the branch here you see these tiny little white dots. They are really tiny. Look at that comparison to my finger. It is really nothing. These are the grain of salt, but they're doing massive damage to the plant. But after 1.5, 2 years, I now have these potted up junipers. Now, if you want to know what happens after you put the cuttings in a pot and then you let them sit and they start rooting and how do you treat them then, this is the video for you. Hello! Jelle, growing bonsai, and it is almost spring. We're heading into spring. Time to take a look at my cuttings. This tray is the tray of cuttings I took last year. They have just been sitting in the shade. Suddenly they've just been sitting in semi-shade. And I'm curious to see how many have rooted. Not all have rooted. Some have died, very clearly. Let's pull these out. I really didn't think this through now, did I? Now how am I going to figure out which ones are alive and which not? One by one, I suppose. Rooted, rooted, rooted. So what we can conclude is that mostly the small tips that I cut in late summer have not rooted yet, but are still very healthy. So I'm going to plant those up in the tray as well. And that some died, but not many. And most of the bigger cuttings of last spring have rooted. I'm going to pot those up as well. Leftover substrate from a previous repotting. This is unbelievable how many I already have that are rooted, and I only have this little small section here left to stick the ones that have not rooted. Let me stick the small ones, put it away, then I'll show you in summer what this tray looks like. Well, we've reached the end of summer, it's October, and let's take a look at these plants. In fact, I did take a quick peek and I'm going to have some disturbing news for you. But first, let's get this out of the weeds, clean it up a little bit. And the disturbing news is not the weeds. It's also not that these have not grown all that much, although that was a sign for me to check. These have not grown all that much. These are of course cuttings. These are rooted cuttings that I planted earlier in the video. No, what I found disturbing is the little white dots here on these plants. So all along the branch here you see these tiny little white dots. They are really tiny. Look at that comparison to my finger. It is really nothing. These are the grain of salt, but they're doing massive damage to the plant. These are actually Juniper Scale. And even though it is just a cutting, they can get massive infection, as you can see here. So cuttings are not immune to pests, of course. So what I'm going to do, well, I'm going to treat this. I'm going to treat it with a product against scale. And this is probably going to be something pyrethrin based. I'll have to check what I have. You can also use oil based, but because it is still quite warm, I don't want to put any oils on my junipers just yet. And I'll treat it again in 2 weeks' time to make sure that any dormant eggs that are on the plant don't start hatching and then reinfect the plants. It is the start of winter. Well, it's the middle of fall. I'm going to check all my other junipers now as well and see whether they have the same infection, because these things can spread over winter and you might end up in spring with lower branches on your junipers yellowing, dying off. So it is important in fall, when you're preparing to put everything to rest for winter, to check your plants and see whether there's any pest, because you know what? I'd missed it completely. So pyrethrin based pesticide, 20 milliliters into a liter of water, so that's a 2% dilution. Nice and soaking, lots and lots. Now with that done, let's have a look at some of these cuttings. If you look at a cutting like this one, this had quite a bit of extension, even though there are a few scale here. This one is nice and happy. Here the same. This one has responded with needle foliage. So it is alive, it is happy, it is growing, but it needs to put a lot of growth and get back to health. Same for this one here. But you can see that pretty much all, well, this one, all of the ones that were rooted when I planted them are doing quite well. There's a little dead tip here. Then if you look at this section, these are all the cuttings that didn't have roots. Well, this one didn't get roots. I can remove that, right? Same for this one. This doesn't look happy. Might have a few roots, but you see it did grow roots, but most of the foliage died. This could be because of scale, but I don't think so, because there's no scale visible on this plant. Anyway, this is roughly what I normally find. A bunch of them dies, a bunch of them doesn't. So this also rooted, but it in the end did die. And this is pretty much it. Now I can put this out for the winter, and in spring look at it again, plant them up individually, because these are now all big enough for their own pots, right? Springtime, middle of the repotting. My hands are filthy, it is cold, it is wet, everything is dirty. Let's have a look. Look, this one has now rooted, but because of the rain, the roots have actually started to decompose again, because they've been just too wet in the spot that they were. Still, I'm going to count this as one that has rooted. Let me lift all of these out and just take a peek and look at how many have rooted since. So here this one also has just decayed. So quite a few more have rooted from the cuttings that I added to it earlier. And now I really have a large amount of rooted Itogawa cuttings. Not all of them have rooted. It's not been really great this round. And as you see, these roots, they're not looking all that good. It's been very, very wet. So that's maybe the main takeaway in this video. Yes, shade, yes, humid, but when it starts raining continuously, give them a bit of shelter. Make sure they don't stay wet all the time. Now these were the ones that were already rooted last season. And you can tell here also the roots are not all that great at the moment. So I'm going to pot them up individually in open substrate and put them in a little bit sunnier spot. And as I was clearing out this container, I noticed what my mistake was. Look here, you see, it looks like it has holes all the way up to the bottom. But actually, on the inside, the holes are not all the way up to the bottom. There's a 2 mil area where there's no drainage. And I've not made a lot of holes here in the bottom. These small holes, they got clogged. water couldn't drain, and basically the rootings have been sitting in standing water for the last 4 months. That's not good for roots. Now what I've done, I've split them up between small ones and big ones. These pots are a little bit bigger than these, and now it's just a matter of getting them in there. So I just add some substrate. And now I'm not going to pay a lot of attention to the roots. I'll do that next time that I'm repotting. Now I'm just going to focus on getting the roots nicely in this pot, covered with substrate. Just like this. And do this for all the cuttings. Now these are quite long roots. Just reducing them a little bit. I want to enhance the number of roots, not the length of the roots. Now, just for information, look at these roots. This is what you want healthy roots in spring to look like. Not this dark black stuff. This is still alive. There is still a red shine in the roots, but they're really not doing well. Whereas these are young, healthy, well-growing roots. This I'm really happy with. In fact, now I'm going to put this in a separate pot. Note I'm not putting it up straight. The roots were a little bit one-sided, so this way I'll aid that these roots are actually in a nice shape for the nebari. And then the plant will grow upwards a little bit more from what it has now. It will create a curve in the trunk, which is actually really nice for bonsai. Note that I'm not pressing down on the substrate because I don't want young roots to break. I'm just gently tapping the pot, and later on with a bit of water I'll water them down to put them solidly in the ground. This one, I'll trim the roots and I'll plant this one here. If you're looking for a video on how to propagate junipers in itself, of course I have this video as well. Find it down below in the description. Naturally, after you have rooted these cuttings, it is really interesting. How do you then create a nice and twisty juniper? Look down below in the description, and that's where I have another video on this topic. 10, 20, 30, 31, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 36 new Itoigawa juniper for the cost of a little bit of time. I hope this helped a little bit in understanding how I go about propagating these. As said, over winter these were left way too wet. I didn't pay attention. The container I was using wasn't great for continuous rain, and continuous rain we've had this year, but quite confident these will over the next couple of weeks start to reroot, start to grow, and then yeah, I've got another 36 Itoigawa junipers that I can wire out or use for grafting, give away. These are really good for grafting. I'm going to leave them in the small narrow pots so I can later on quite easily plant them in another plant. These I'll let grow out, wire out a little bit. These will need to be planted up. And these, you know what, I might just give it away. Well, I hope this was pleasant for you. Let me know in the comments what you thought. Do share the video if you like it. And see you next time. This was Jelle. Keep growing bonsai.